Many of us have become, in a real sense, that detached anthropologist. The way that Richard Burton, who did not understand many things about what he was seeing, said to himself that he was not sure whether the African was a part of history, but he was sure it was a part of nature. It's a funny thing to think about. He is the one that needed to be pitied, not the African people. The African people have always been a part of history. All the peoples of the world have been a part of human history. So what we need to think about, when we see people, the masses of our people, and we do not see the opportunities for advertising to lift society, to improve communities, it is we. We are the people who should be felt sorry for. In our self-importance, we are the people who have lost the connection to our communities and our societies, and for as long as we lose that connection, for just so long, we will become irrelevant. And we will talk about the threats of extinction, not realizing that it is not the world that is changing so fast around us, it is us that constantly are getting disconnected and therefore are becoming more and more irrelevant. In my own personal experience, I am constantly challenging our marketing department in the larger sense of the word. Be out there, go where the people are, go, sit there in the informal settlements, understand the things that motivate people, because the more you do, the more you know how to win in these communities. We spend a lot of time in my base in Lagos. We call it Niger centricity, because I believe in the concept of creative convergence. I don't believe that advertisers can sit by themselves, completely extinct from the disconnected from the rest of the creative effort, whether they're fashion designers, artists, and just somehow be creative by themselves. You have to nourish that creativity by connecting with all the creative life that is happening around you. And as I go through, you will see that I will make a few comments in this regard. So brands in Africa must place Africans at the center of what they do. The brands that come into Africa saying that they have a global experience that has to be foisted on the African reality, regardless of what the reality in Africa is, they will just simply miss it. Of course, because we are part of human society, like all the other peoples of the world, some of that reality will, of course, resonate, but not all of it. All peoples of the world, regardless of what the sources are, they have their culture, they have their way of doing things. I'm not saying that it is static, it can be moved. But if you do not engage, if you do not respectfully try to understand, you miss it. No matter what became of him later, at the peak of his influence, Ahmed Sékou Touré of Guinea used to say, only the people make history, only the people make history. Not the marketing departments, not the agencies, not people sitting in disconnected realities. It is the people, and the majority of the people are not sitting in halls like this. They're out there on the streets, as we say in Lagos. So we have to connect, so we have to make sure that we are having a respectful conversation, a respectful dialogue, that we are humble enough to learn from people who may not be as formally educated as you and I are, but who have an experience of life from which we can benefit and from which we can nourish what we do in terms of brand building. I met a man recently who has influenced me in many ways. His name is Professor Father Godfrey Nzamujo. He is a polymath. He is qualified in so many things, a little bit of a molecular biologist, a physicist, he has a PhD in economic philosophy, and many, many things. And I've just mentioned just a few. And he's the director of Songhai Center in Porto Novo, Benin. And I constantly stay in touch with him and occasionally visit him to try and get the stimulation that he gives to many people. An outstanding individual, but very quiet and modest. And he said this to me: the past and the future are part of the present. It is the past and the future that galvanize the present. And what I take out from Nzamujo in the context that we are having the conversation, I've touched on it already today, is that our reality is our reality. The good and the bad about Africa, those are our realities. Africa Rising as a movement and a context of brand development should recognize the things that we are not proud of and do something about them. The task of Africa Rising cannot be that we hide the things that we are not proud of from the rest of the world. It is not a sustainable strategy for going forward. The task of Africa Rising has to be that it keeps the African people confident that if we too try, we too can arrive where other peoples are and surpass them. But it cannot be that we constantly get together to say to ourselves that what should be galvanizing elements of our reality, things that we are not proud of, do not exist. The world in many ways faces challenges. It's not just the African reality. I was speaking in London 2 days ago, and I was telling them, sometimes I think the world has gone plain crazy. You take some of the food supply chains of the world, 40% of its produce is thrown away. And yet in this same world, 1 billion people, or close to that, it's now 815 million if you want to be more precise, they go to bed hungry every night. Now let's think about our own homes, the amount of food that goes into the bin. So you have a food supply chain that keeps, and this has to be a wake-up call for all of us, but it's just one example. My favorite example, I speak to people about it every opportunity I have, daily. There are 1 billion people in the world who are subjected to the indignity of open defecation. And yet the world has sufficient surplus resource to deal with this. We'll come back to more of that. So intersectionality is a concept that I learned from Angela Davis, and I like it very much because she was talking to the feminist movement in the United States and saying that you cannot look at people through just one axis. She said, I am a black woman, that is who I am. I am a woman, I am black, I am an academic, I am many things. And there's a class element of me as well. So you cannot study me on one axis. So the concept of intersectionality is something that she puts out, and I like to use because we, when we talk about the African reality, need to see it in the same way. Africa is a part of the local reality, it is a part of the regional reality, it is a part of the global reality, and we should not be forced to choose. All the peoples of the world are able to take from a pot as they see right. I do not believe that to be African means to shut down other influences. That's wrong. Or to accept those other influences means to shut down your being African. You can be all of them at the same time. There is nobody who is going to determine for us what our identity is. Identity is a multi-variable equation from my point of view. I often don't like to read charts to people, but the reason I will do this is because I think that Amartya Sen, many people here will know about Professor Amartya Sen, Nobel Prize winner for economics, outstanding scholar in many ways, but I believe that he says something which the state of the broken world that we live in today, with the rise of nativism as we see in many parts of the world, really needs to hear this. A lot of the challenges that we face in the world today are because we compress people's identity into a single variable, and in doing so, we forget that we are first and foremost connected by our common humanity. That is what sustains the world at the end of the day. What Amartya says is any classification according to a singular identity polarizes people in a particular way. But if we take note of the fact that we have many different identities, related not just to religion, but also to language, occupation and business, politics, class and poverty, and many others, we can see that the polarization of one can be resisted by a fuller picture. So knowledge and understanding are extremely important to fight against singular polarization. He was right when he said this, he is right now, and he will be right into the future. And those of us who have the opportunity, maybe even the privilege of building brands must constantly remember this. At various times we will deal with variables of identity, but at the end of the day, the work that we do must bring the world together as a common whole by first and foremost emphasizing that no matter what other tag you can come up with, at the end of the day, we are all human beings, and that's the common connector. I don't believe that Ngugi wa Thiong'o, given what his political context is, would necessarily have thought that his words that are stated on here will be used in a conference like this. But I believe very strongly that what he says here also resonates with marketeers. And I've said some of this before. It's extremely important to realize that the world is not a world of any one dominant center. The world is a world of many moving, floating centers in constant conversation and constant interaction, learning from each other, and if we are humble enough, influencing and being influenced. That is the way to get the world into a proper equilibrium. The world is always at danger when any one group begins to believe that it alone is the center of the world, and it alone has the power and the influence to change the world. So the aspiration of the world reality that we work to, when we talk Afrocentricity, when we talk Africa rising, should not be that necessarily Africa also one day becomes a superpower that bullies and dictates to the rest of the world. It should be that Africa rising means an empowered world, more empowerment for many people that gets the world into true conversation and deconstructs some of the negative aspects of power being too concentrated in parts of the world. I saw the shocking statistic recently, not that I am against prosperity when it is ethically and legally gained. I support it. I believe that people must have material rewards for hard work. But we have to sit back and say, where has short-term capitalism taken us when we confront the reality, as we have recently been told, that 8 people, less than the fingers on my hands, 8 people, at the top of the socioeconomic pyramid of the world today have a net wealth that is equal to the bottom 3.5 billion in the world. The system clearly is not working. No matter what you tell me, something has broken in the redistributive mechanisms of the world. Now, those who like philosophy will know that many years ago, John Stuart Mill said that he believed that distribution was not the province of economics, distribution was the province of politics. When you look at the state of the world today, I do have to say that there is something in there. And I have to also say that marketeers are not exempt from the world of politics. If you look at it in a restricted view, you think it's only people like the minister and so on who are talking about it. But you have to understand that what we do in brands, what we do in marketing, the impulses, the agenda that we set, all of this influences it too. So we too have a responsibility in that regard. I chose an example which some people here will know better than me, but I can also realize that some people here will not know about Ephraim. And those of you who think I'm about to utter some blasphemy, just relax. I'm not at all going into any theological contradictions or anything. But those who know the story of Ephraim, who in my view was a distinguished African who actually must be written more about and must be talked more about, know that when Ephraim entered the church, as it had then come to be known in Africa, Ephraim insisted that the African must be able to worship God, the Christian God as was then being preached, with their musical instruments and with their own sense of fashion. Today it seems so easy to accept that. At the time it created a firestorm, and if my knowledge of history is right, I think he was even excommunicated from the church. But Ephraim was teaching the church something that comes close to what is your theme for today. Ephraim was teaching the church that if it did not adapt, it will die in the African circumstance. And when you look at what then happened, even though he was almost thrown out, what then happened to make the church and its pilgrimage in Africa gain traction, he was the one that was right. The same holds true for people who are building brands in Africa. If you just insist on your own global prejudices, you believe that you know better for people what should be their journey, you become irrelevant. And I often like to think about the story of Ephraim and then look at the church, the state of the church in Africa today, and say that he should have been around. So let me give you one example. So if you think about it, that he was excommunicated for thinking that he could take a drum, imagine what would have happened to Uche if those people could see it today. But it is also extremely true that if the sense of accommodation that enables people to express themselves in this way had not been done, other people would have moved to other formats. And that is a constant reminder to those of us who are trying to build brands all the time. I think this chart speaks for itself. I don't need to say more. I've touched on it many times. Unless you are willing to engage people with respect, and I speak to the African marketeers, because the danger is even bigger for us. Many of us feel that automatically by being African we get it, but we are living in a community. We may be in some ways knowledgeable of it, but in many ways our reality is very different from the reality of the majority of Africans, and we have become disconnected. And if we do not respect some of the things that history teaches us, we will go the way that the dinosaurs went. Eventually, that's what will happen to us. So in spite of the fact that I have said that the African rising narrative must guard against a constant focus on only that which is positive, it is also true that we should not allow the narrative to become one long unbroken tale of woe. That is also true, because that's not all the reality. I say to many marketeers, they present research work to me in Nigeria, and they start out by saying the Nigerian reality is a very difficult one. Life is extremely difficult for the average Nigerian, and therefore they do not enjoy life. And I say, well, it is true that life is difficult. I don't run away from it. I've lived in many parts of the world, and I can tell you that in spite of the challenges of the Nigerian community and society, I have known no other people, and they can contradict me, many of them are here, no other people have I known who enjoy life more than the Nigerian people. And so if you start out by saying that because of what you see around you, because you cannot imagine that as your reality, there are people that don't understand how to enjoy life, you miss it completely. And you fall into the trap that Said was talking about Orientalism. And yet you go back, you look at a lot of research, and you will see that that's exactly the way that it starts. The brand must do something to alleviate the suffering of the people, and yet the people are saying to you, if you walk in the streets of Surulere and so on and so forth, they are saying to you, we are happy, we are enjoying life. That's what you have to understand. How in spite of that sort of situation, people have developed the resilience to be able to enjoy. That's what the brand must understand and get under, and then see how it leverages and engages in a conversation with people. So the African reality, if you take creativity to be from life, as I have said, it's something that Piyush Pandey, who was a creative director in India, I learned from. He said it to me once, and it stayed with me. Creativity is from life, creativity is from all of life. If you believe that, then around you, you always see the substrates to do things with brands. You always see things that you can leverage, things that you do not dismiss.